The night was unusually still, the kind of quiet that made the slightest sound feel enormous. Ethan Carrick trudged through the cracked soil of his farm, his boots sinking slightly into the dry, hardened earth. His water supply was almost gone, and the drought had left his fields empty, but something made him pause. A soft, high-pitched squeal floated from the old barn at the edge of his property. Ethan froze. The sound was tiny, desperate, almost human in its urgency. His heart thumped. He wasn't sure what it was, but it didn't belong in his world. He gripped the wooden staff he carried for walking, every sense alert. A moment later, a second squeal followed, and it was closer, weaker, pained. He had no idea what he would find, but something deep in him stirred, a need to act. Pushing open the barn door, Ethan stepped into darkness. Moonlight spilled across scattered hay, illuminating nothing at first. Then he saw them, a wriggling pile of creatures tightly packed together like sardines, their tiny bodies trembling. Their scales shimmered faintly, iridescent under the pale light. Ethan's stomach knotted. They were small dragons, or something very like dragons, but weak, starving, and trembling as if their life force was being drained. A sick, choking feeling rose in his throat. He had never seen anything like it. Their wings were underdeveloped, their eyes barely open. A faint hiss of pain came from one, its throat rasping like it had tried to cry and couldn't. Ethan's first instinct was panic. He was just a farmer. What could he do against creatures like this? But he could not turn away. Not when life was in front of him, so fragile. He took a step forward. One of the hatchlings twitched and made a soft squeal again, and that small sound hit him like a hammer. He knelt, keeping his movements slow, careful not to frighten them more. Tentatively he scooped up the smallest, the weakest among them. Its tiny body shivered in his hands. Ethan felt a pang of fear mixed with determination. "Don't worry," he whispered, voice barely audible, "I won't let you die." As he cradled the hatchling, a sudden shimmer filled the barn. The air around the pile of dragons flickered like heat waves rising from the ground, but colder, sharper, almost electric. Ethan blinked. The creature's scales pulsed faintly in time with the shimmering, and a strange, tingling hum filled the air. He staggered back slightly, heart pounding. This was no ordinary barn. No ordinary creatures. Whatever these hatchlings were, they carried a secret energy he didn't understand, but he could feel its power. Without hesitation, he set the hatchling down on a pile of soft hay he quickly pulled together. His mind raced. Fire would keep them warm. Water would keep them alive. But every moment spent here increased risk. These strange creatures might attract predators or worse, someone who would take them for their own. His hands worked quickly, gathering dry wood, striking flint to spark a small fire at the far corner of the barn. The flames sputtered to life, flickering golden across the trembling bodies. The hatchling's scales reflected the firelight, creating a dancing pattern of color that made Ethan blink in awe. One of the slightly stronger hatchlings crawled toward the fire, tiny wings fluttering, and Ethan smiled despite the tension. A small win. They were responding to warmth, to care. He whispered again softly, "You'll be safe. I promise." He could feel the weight of responsibility settling over him, heavier than any load he had carried on the farm. A human alone, against the unknown, but unwilling to walk away from life. Then a noise outside made him freeze. A low, mechanical whir, faint but distinct. Ethan's pulse quickened. The barn door rattled. Someone, was coming. His eyes darted toward the shadows outside, and for a heartbeat he imagined the worst. Scavengers, thieves, perhaps something far stranger drawn to the alien energy now pulsing faintly from the hatchlings. The firelight flickered across the barn beams. The smallest dragon opened its eyes wider, tiny pupils reflecting the glow, and a strange, almost intelligent gaze met Ethan's. It was as if it understood him. His chest tightened. Protecting them was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. He took a deep breath and stepped closer to the barn door, staff in hand, ready for whatever waited outside, ready to defend these fragile lives at any cost. A shadow moved in the doorway. Larger than any man, broader than a horse. Ethan's stomach dropped. He had no idea if it was friend or foe. He froze, every instinct screaming that the next second could change everything. Then the figure stepped fully into the moonlight, and Ethan realized it was like nothing he had ever seen before. A massive silhouette, scales glinting faintly even in the dark, loomed in the doorway. It made a sound that was both a growl and a rumble, shaking the barn floor. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest. The hatchlings stirred, huddling together, and a strange energy pulsed stronger, as if they were calling to it. Ethan tightened his grip on the staff, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no reinforcements. Only courage, only resolve. And yet, as he stared at the shadow, he felt something stir in him. A certainty that humans could face the impossible and still make the right choice. A small hiss from the shadowed figure, almost like a warning, and then it froze. Ethan noticed movement behind it, more shadows, smaller, shifting. The barn was suddenly alive with mystery, danger, and possibility. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. One step at a time. One choice at a time. Protect the hatchlings. Survive the night. And somehow, find out what the universe had dropped into his barn. Then the shadow moved closer and the barn trembled. Ethan's heart hammered as the massive shadow advanced, its heavy footsteps thudding against the barn floor. His mind raced, trying to understand what he faced. The creature's scales glinted faintly, reflecting the firelight from the small blaze he had built. It was enormous, easily twice the size of any horse he had ever seen, and its eyes glowed with an intelligence that sent shivers down his spine. Behind it, smaller shadows stirred, more of the same, but their movements were quick, precise, almost predatory. The hatchlings squealed softly, huddling together. Ethan crouched low, his staff ready, though he knew it was nothing more than a piece of wood against whatever approached. The smell of ozone and energy filled the barn. He realized the creatures outside were reacting to the alien pulse of the hatchlings. The energy he had sensed earlier wasn't just a flicker, it was a beacon. He had to act. If the shadowed creatures were hostile, the hatchlings wouldn't survive long. He glanced at the fire, then back at the approaching figures, weighing his options. Panic surged, but he pushed it down. Humans survived because they could make hard choices under pressure. He grabbed a handful of hay, tossed it toward the far wall, and shouted, "Hey!" The firelight flickered violently, catching the shadow's attention. It worked, partially. The massive figure stopped, tilting its head, studying the movement. The smaller ones hesitated, unsure. Ethan took advantage of the pause. He scooped up the strongest hatchling and slipped toward the side door of the barn, praying the shadows wouldn't follow immediately. He had learned long ago on the farm that movement and distraction could buy you time. Outside, the air was colder, the night wind sharp against his face. The moon revealed cracked fields, broken fences, and a small creek running through the property. He sprinted toward a hidden dugout he had built for emergencies, carrying the hatchling carefully against his chest. The creature shivered violently and Ethan whispered, "Almost there, just a little farther." A sudden whir of metal made him freeze. He turned in time to see a small drone hovering, its sensors glowing red. It scanned the area with a precise, mechanical hum. Ethan's stomach sank. Scavenger drones? They were likely tracking the alien energy. If they found the hatchlings, there would be no saving them. He ducked behind a large rock, pressing the hatchling close. He knew the drones had limited range but high precision. The barn might have been their first signal, but they would search every inch of the surrounding land. Ethan's mind spun, he couldn't fight them head-on. He needed ingenuity. He grabbed a coil of rope from his belt, tying it across the narrow path where the drones would pass. Then, using a small rock, he triggered a pulley mechanism he had built years ago for moving hay bales. A metal trap swung across the drone's path just as it approached, knocking it sideways into the mud. Sparks flew, and the whirring sound screamed into the night. The drone tried to stabilize but faltered, its sensors glitching. Ethan exhaled sharply. A small victory, but he knew there would be more. He pressed on toward the dugout, dropping the hatchling inside and checking the other two. They were weak but still alive. One opened its eyes slightly, looking at him with a flicker of recognition. A tiny moment of connection, a reminder of why he risked everything. He straightened, scanning the horizon. The barn was still visible in the distance, the fire casting an eerie glow. The massive creature outside had not moved, but the smaller shadows were circling now, clearly aware of his escape. Ethan's pulse quickened. He needed a plan and fast. Using the creek as cover, he led the hatchlings through a series of shallow water crossings. Their claws sank into the muddy banks, their small wings brushing the surface. He whispered encouragements, though he wasn't sure if they understood. It didn't matter, he could feel their trust growing, fragile as it was. That trust gave him strength. Suddenly, the energy pulsing from the hatchlings surged. Ethan stumbled, almost dropping one. The creek water reflected a strange, bluish glow. The hatchling's scales shimmered brighter than ever, and Ethan realized something shocking. Their energy could affect the environment. Tiny ripples of light danced across the water, and the smaller shadows outside recoiled, hissing in ways he couldn't identify. A small, clever idea formed. He knew the hatchling's energy was unique, and the shadows reacted to it. Maybe he could use it to create a barrier or at least slow them down. He whispered to the hatchlings, encouraging them to stay together, and their glow intensified slightly. The shadows froze again, hesitating at the edge of the field. Ethan's heart pounded. He had never used anything like this before. He was improvising, relying on courage and instinct, but it worked. He led them to a hollowed-out embankment near the far edge of the property. The small trench could hide them from sight, and the energy glow was partially blocked by earth and shadows. He settled the hatchlings inside, covering them with dirt and leaves carefully, leaving just enough space to breathe. The moment they were secure, he paused, chest heaving, sweat and mud covering him. For a heartbeat, the night was silent, save for the faint ripple of the creek. Then came the unmistakable sound of heavy wings brushing the air. A shadow passed overhead, enormous, powerful. Ethan's stomach dropped. The barn fire flickered and dimmed. Whatever was out there wasn't leaving. And now it was learning, hunting, adapting. Ethan clenched his fists. His body ached, his mind raced, but he refused to give in. The hatchlings were alive because he had acted, because he had risen to a challenge no one else could face. But the danger was far from over. Whatever force had sent the shadows, whatever technology was tracking them, it was patient and relentless. A faint pulse of energy rippled through the night, almost like a heartbeat. Ethan froze. The hatchlings responded instantly, their tiny bodies glowing in unison. The pulse was stronger now, and somewhere in the darkness, a voice, or a sound like a voice, answered back. Ethan swallowed hard. He realized with a mix of awe and fear that this night had only just begun. Something far larger than a farmer's problem was awake, aware and hunting. And he, a lone human, was at the center of it. The shadows were moving again, closing in, and Ethan knew he had to make the next move immediately, or lose everything. Ethan crouched in the hollowed trench, every muscle tensed, listening to the rustle of shadows and the faint hum of alien energy. The hatchlings huddled together, their tiny bodies pulsing with light, as if they were trying to communicate something he couldn't yet understand. His mind raced. He had survived the first attack, outsmarted the drones and shielded the hatchlings, but now the danger was smarter, more calculated. The shadows outside weren't just creatures, they were hunters. He needed information. His farm offered little, but his eyes caught a glint near the barn's shattered wall. Something buried in the dirt reflected moonlight in tiny, crystalline flashes. Curiosity mixed with caution. Ethan crawled forward, careful to keep the hatchlings covered. When he reached the object, he realized it was small, perfectly smooth, and unlike anything he had seen before. A crystal device the size of a hatchling, pulsing faintly in sync with their energy. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he lifted it. The air around it vibrated with a soft hum, almost musical. He held it close and suddenly, a holographic star map projected from the crystal, glowing in midair. Lines of light connected distant stars, and dots blinked in patterns that suggested movement. Ethan's mind struggled to comprehend. This wasn't a simple alien artifact. It was a beacon, a tracker, a signal. The hatchlings weren't just lost. They were refugees from somewhere else, far beyond the galaxy he knew. His heart pounded. He was holding proof of something monumental, something dangerous. If the shadows outside were connected to this, they could follow him anywhere. But he also realized, this device could protect the hatchlings if used wisely. Ethan's practical mind kicked in. He had built contraptions on his farm before, rigging pulleys and traps for tools, for animals, for emergencies. Could he adapt this alien tech to shield the hatchlings? He quickly examined the crystal, noting its pulse synced with the hatchlings' energy. The brighter they glowed, the stronger the hum. Ethan realized that if he could amplify or stabilize the pulse, the shadows might be repelled, or at least slowed. It was risky, he had no idea what would happen. One wrong move, and the energy could attract even more attention, or harm the hatchlings. He gathered wires from old farm equipment, strips of metal from broken tools, and improvised a circuit to focus the crystal's energy. He whispered encouragement to the hatchlings, hoping they would respond. Their glow intensified, filling the trench with shimmering light. The shadows outside hissed and recoiled, unable to approach as easily. Small victories mattered, and this was one. Ethan allowed himself a brief exhale of relief. Then came the sound of wings. A giant shadow detached from the darkness, moving silently across the field toward the barn. Ethan froze. This was no drone. No ordinary predator. Its size, its precision, its intelligence in movement, it was the one he had glimpsed earlier, the massive silhouette that had frozen him with awe. And now it was closer than ever. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had no weapons powerful enough to confront it directly. No reinforcements. But humans survive because we adapt and improvise. He remembered an old scarecrow rig he had built, a pulley system meant to swing heavy objects across the field to deter wild animals. A plan formed. He strapped the crystal to the central hook, wiring it to trigger when the hatchling's pulse intensified. Then he tied ropes to nearby boulders and placed them strategically along the field's narrow paths. The shadows would have to navigate the terrain to reach him, and the crystal's energy pulse would disrupt them. Every piece depended on timing and human ingenuity. As he finished, a faint hiss came from the trench. One hatchling had lifted its head, blinking in a way that startled him. Its wings twitched slightly and a soft, musical hum joined the crystal's pulse. Ethan realized they were cooperating. Their energy wasn't just reactive, it could be directed. The tiny creatures, weaker than any human, were now allies in his desperate gamble. Suddenly, the massive shadow surged forward, moving with terrifying speed. Ethan pulled the rope trigger. The boulder swung across the field, narrowly missing him, and hit the ground with a deafening crash. The shadow froze, its massive head tilting, as if confused by the unexpected obstruction. The smaller shadows hesitated too, trapped in the patterns of the makeshift barriers. Ethan felt a surge of hope but knew better than to relax. The creature's intelligence was clear. It was learning, adapting, testing his defenses. He ducked behind a mound, heart hammering, watching as the massive figure scanned the field. Then, unexpectedly, it emitted a deep rumble, low and resonant. The hatchlings responded immediately, their glow brightening, synchronized with the crystal. The sound vibrated through the soil and air, and Ethan realized something astounding. The massive shadow recognized his intent, not just the hatchlings. For a moment he dared to hope. Perhaps this was not only a test but a recognition of courage. Humans, after all, were capable of compassion even when the odds were impossible. Ethan straightened slightly, standing in the trench, sweat and dirt covering him. His mind was racing, calculating next steps. Every move had consequences. Every choice mattered. Then, in the distance, a faint glimmer appeared on the horizon, an unmistakable flash of technology, alien in design, far larger than any drone. It was coming for him, for the hatchlings, or perhaps for both. Ethan's stomach sank, but he didn't falter. He clenched his fists and whispered, "We're not done yet. Not by a long shot." The night had shifted. The chase, the danger, the mystery, it was far from over. But Ethan, a lone human farmer, had discovered something incredible, had adapted, improvised, and survived against impossible odds. He was ready to take the next step, whatever it cost. Above him, the hatchlings pulsed with light, the crystal thrummed in sync, and the massive shadow on the field hesitated once more. And then a new sound split the night, a high, piercing whistle unlike anything he had heard, and the horizon flared with a blinding glow that promised both danger and revelation. Ethan's chest burned as he crouched behind the embankment, the hatchlings huddled at his feet. The glowing crystal pulsed in rhythm with their tiny bodies, casting shifting blue and green patterns across the muddy field. Every instinct in him screamed danger. The massive shadow from before had moved again, gliding silently across the cracked earth with terrifying precision. The smaller shadows flanked it, hunting in coordinated waves, and the alien drones hummed somewhere in the distance, scanning relentlessly. He had survived, he had improvised, but now the stakes had escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. If they reached the hatchlings, there would be no saving them. And yet, in the terrifying presence of the unknown, Ethan felt something familiar surge through him: courage. Humans thrived where others froze. And he was not about to fail these tiny lives. He scanned the field. The shadows were adapting to his traps, moving with intelligence and precision. But the crystal, pulsing in the trench, gave him a new idea. If the hatchling's energy could disrupt the shadows, maybe he could use it to create a temporary barrier, one that could protect them long enough for him to act. It was a gamble, a desperate human gamble, but it was all he had. Ethan carefully adjusted the crystal, wiring it to a small metal rod he had fashioned from a broken rake handle. The energy pulsed faster as he connected it to the hatchling's combined glow. A high, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the earth beneath his feet. The shadows froze, their movements jerking in confusion. The massive figure halted mid-step, towering in the moonlight, while the smaller ones hissed and skidded to a stop. A brief moment of triumph surged through Ethan. They had been slowed. He whispered, "Good, stay together, keep glowing." The hatchlings responded, their tiny wings fluttering in sync, and the light intensified. The trench now glowed like a beacon, a shield of hope against impossible odds. Then came a sound that made his blood run cold, a deafening crack across the field. The massive shadow had lunged toward him, faster than anything he had anticipated. Ethan ducked instinctively, but the shockwave of the landing rattled the earth, throwing mud and debris into the trench. One hatchling squealed, struggling beneath a small clump of dirt. Ethan dove, scooping it up just in time. Another mini payoff moment. A life saved, a bond strengthened. He scrambled to his feet, staff and crystal rod in hand. He had no weapons beyond his wits and the creature's energy. His mind raced. The massive shadow was testing him, gauging his ability, his courage, his resolve. And if it learned he was compassionate, maybe, just maybe, it would hesitate. Humans, after all, could inspire trust even in the impossible. The shadows surged again, coordinated now. Ethan ducked behind a boulder and remembered the old pulley traps from Part 3. He sprinted across the field, luring the smaller shadows into a narrow corridor between rocks. The crystal pulsed violently in the trench, and the hatchling's light flared like a starburst, sending the shadows skidding backward. A small, triumphant smile flashed on Ethan's face. It was working, but he knew it wouldn't last long. From above, the massive figure circled, wings slicing through the night air. Ethan realized the final confrontation was inevitable. He had to show that he was not just a farmer but a protector, a strategist, a human capable of brilliance under pressure. He grabbed a rope tied to a boulder and swung it across the path of the largest shadow, creating a momentary obstacle. The creature paused mid-step, its enormous eyes locking onto him. Ethan took a deep breath. He stepped fully into view, holding the crystal rod aloft. The trench glowed, the hatchlings pulsing in unison with the device. The massive figure stopped, its head tilting, rumbling low in a tone that sounded almost like recognition. Ethan's pulse raced, but he forced himself to speak softly, firmly, "I will protect them. No matter what." The shadow hesitated. It was huge, overwhelming, terrifying, but intelligent. Ethan could sense it calculating, testing him. And then, unexpectedly, the smallest of the shadows emitted a shrill whistle, and the massive figure froze entirely. The hatchling's glow surged, synchronized with the crystal, and a sudden pulse of light and energy rolled across the field. Ethan ducked as the pulse expanded. The smaller shadows were flung backward, hissing and skidding across the mud. The massive figure hovered, wings beating, suspended midair, clearly stunned by the display. It was as if the hatchlings had communicated through the energy, showing him as a friend rather than a threat. One of the tiny dragons opened its mouth and hissed softly at the giant, almost like a challenge or a call. Ethan's chest tightened. He could see the intelligence in both the massive figure and the hatchlings. Life, no matter the form, understood courage. He didn't pause to celebrate. He grabbed the hatchlings and ran toward the hidden creek, using the shadow's momentary confusion to gain distance. Water splashed around his boots as he waded through shallow pools, protecting the tiny creatures against both the mud and the cold. Their glow provided faint illumination, guiding him, and he whispered encouragements with each step. Almost there, just a little farther. Then came another surprise. From the horizon, a flashing light, far larger and brighter than the drones, appeared, moving rapidly toward the field. Ethan's stomach dropped. Whatever force had sent the shadows, whatever technology was tracking them, it was escalating. Yet he didn't falter. Humans survived by adapting. Humans survived by standing when everything else would fall. And he would not fail these hatchlings. He ducked into a hidden hollow near the far side of the property. The shadows hesitated again, unsure how to proceed. Ethan placed the hatchlings gently inside, covering them with leaves while keeping the crystal rod nearby. Their glow was steady now, rhythmic, synchronized with his heartbeat. He looked back at the field. The massive shadow hovered at the edge, observing, calculating. Ethan swallowed hard. Every nerve in his body screamed tension, danger, and uncertainty, but he also felt the small, steady thrill of victory. Against impossible odds he had bought time. He had defended the hatchlings. He had outsmarted creatures far larger and stronger than himself. He had shown courage, intelligence, and compassion in a universe that offered neither. But the night was far from over. From the distant horizon, the larger force approached, faster than anything he had seen. A low hum of energy filled the air again, this time resonating across the entire farm, shaking the earth. Ethan's eyes widened. The real challenge was only beginning. He took a deep breath, tightening his grip on the crystal. "We survive. We fight. And we win," he whispered. The glow of the hatchlings flared brighter than ever, and from the shadows, a massive form began to move with purpose, no longer hunting, now testing him. The final confrontation was imminent. Ethan crouched in the hollow, heart still racing, as the massive shadow hovered at the edge of the field. The hatchlings nestled against his chest, tiny wings twitching, eyes glowing softly. The crystal pulsed in rhythm with their energy, filling the hollow with light and warmth. He had survived the first attacks, improvised defenses, and defended the hatchlings against creatures far stronger than himself. Yet he knew the night was not over. From the horizon, a series of massive wings cut across the moonlight, moving faster than anything he had seen. The Royal Dragon Guard had arrived, the colossal silhouettes of fully grown dragons, their scales glinting in alien colors, reflecting the crystal's glow. Ethan's stomach tightened. They were magnificent, intimidating, and utterly alien. He realized immediately that these were not enemies, they were the hatchlings' kin, here to retrieve them. But would they see him as a protector or a threat? The largest of the Royal Guard landed in the field, shaking the ground beneath Ethan's feet. Its massive eyes fixed on him. The smaller shadows previously hunting him now backed away. Ethan understood instinctively, the aliens were reading his intent. A test. A judgment. He had one chance to show that a human could be trusted. He stood, trembling, but straightened his back. Sweat and mud streaked his face. He lifted the crystal rod, letting the hatchling's synchronized glow shine outward. "I won't let anything happen to them," he said softly, voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "I did what I had to do. They are safe." The largest dragon exhaled a low, resonant rumble, shaking the leaves and dirt. Ethan flinched. The glow from the hatchlings pulsed brighter, and the sound of the rumble harmonized with the crystal. Then, astonishingly, the dragon lowered its massive head, eye to eye with him. There was intelligence there, ancient and deep, and a momentary pause that felt like recognition. Ethan's heart leapt. Perhaps the creature understood courage, morality, and determination, human qualities that had driven him through the impossible night. Slowly, the Royal Dragon Guard moved closer to the hatchlings. One by one, the tiny dragons stirred, sensing their kin. They chirped softly, wings fluttering, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat. After everything, the fear, the danger, the relentless night, this moment of connection felt almost sacred. He had done it. He had saved them. Then came another surprise. From the largest dragon's wing, a faint shimmer detached, a small, glowing scale, radiant like the crystal itself. It floated toward Ethan and hovered before his face. He reached out, trembling, and touched it. The warmth that flowed into his hand was unlike anything he had felt, both comforting and empowering. A gift. Recognition. Trust. He realized the dragons had acknowledged his courage, intelligence, and compassion. Humanity, in its small, fragile way, had shown. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He placed the hatchlings gently into the outstretched talons of the smaller dragons, feeling their tiny claws cling briefly before being lifted. The Royal Dragon Guard took to the air, wings slicing through the night sky, carrying the hatchlings toward the stars. Ethan watched until they became tiny glimmers against the moonlight. He felt a mixture of awe and loss, but mostly pride. Then the crystal in his hand pulsed one last time, projecting a small holographic map. A new point blinked far across the galaxy, distant and unexplored. Ethan frowned. This was no ordinary rescue. The artifact had signaled something more, something bigger, something waiting for him beyond this night, beyond this farm. His pulse quickened with a mix of dread and excitement. The universe was far larger than he had imagined, and humans could play a role in it. He looked down at the trench, now empty save for scattered leaves and mud. He thought of the hatchlings, of the choices he had made, of the impossible odds he had faced, and he smiled. Courage, determination, compassion, intelligence, these weren't just traits of dragons, aliens, or distant worlds. Humans had them too. They had saved lives tonight. Against impossible odds, they had made a difference. A sudden wind rustled across the field, and a faint hum echoed from the horizon. The artifact, still active, still pulsing. Ethan realized he wasn't done. Whatever the signal meant, whatever the galaxy was waiting for, it would call again. But he wasn't afraid. Humans had survived deserts, storms, wars, and famine. Humans had adapted, improvised, and fought when all hope seemed lost. He turned back toward his farm, the first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. The night had tested him, stretched him to limits he never imagined, and forced him to rise above fear. And yet he felt ready. The universe had shown him danger, mystery, and life beyond comprehension, and he had responded with the qualities that made humanity exceptional. A distant flicker of light caught his eye, far beyond the hills. It pulsed in rhythm with the crystal he still carried. Ethan's stomach tightened again. Something new was coming, something enormous, unknown, and perhaps more dangerous than the night he had just survived. But this time he was ready. He would face it. He would act. He would survive. And whatever the universe sent next, he knew one thing for certain. Humans could shine even in the darkest corners of space. Ethan clutched the crystal, feeling the faint warmth of the dragon scale against his palm. He smiled, staring at the sky. The hatchlings were safe. The universe was calling. And the next adventure was already beginning. The wind carried a faint hum of energy. Somewhere, out there, beyond the stars, the galaxy waited, and Ethan's human courage, determination, and ingenuity would answer.